Hey everybody! A few weeks ago I reviewed Middlemarch by George Eliot. You can find a link to it up there or down there. And now here are my thoughts on the 1994 BBC miniseries adaptation of that book. This miniseries is made up of 6 episodes, which average about an hour in length. I did see this program once years ago, but like I said in another video, I didn't remember much of anything from it. Well, I sort of remembered the big kiss scene at the end because it shows up sometimes in those period drama fan video things that you can find here on YouTube, which I used to watch all the time. The one character I remembered specifically was actually Mr. Casaubon, which is interesting because I came away from the book feeling that he was the most memorable and best written character in the story, but I'll come back to that in a minute. I enjoyed this miniseries, my mom and I both did. Because I was more familiar with the characters and the characters' names and their relationships with each other, I had a much easier time, I should say, following the story. I think she had some difficulty keeping characters straight and remembering who was who, but we both liked it. We managed to knock it out in a few days. It's well made, though maybe the picture quality itself is a little dated and a little out of focus, I would say, but hey, it is 24 years old. It does a good job conveying the gossipy small-town environment and how toxic that can be, and emphasizing the growing divide between the social classes in pre-reform England. We see the upheaval of the working classes, the demand for proper parliamentary representation, and the infiltration, so to speak, of tradesmen into the social circle of the landed gentry. But it balances these social and political themes with the more personal stories of individuals and their relationships and their romantic conflicts. I think its greatest strength is in its casting. Like I said, there are a lot of characters to keep straight, and they did a really good job finding just the right people to play them. As these things usually are, this is a who's who of familiar faces. I could bore you with a list of all the things that I've seen these actors in, but I won't. One pleasant surprise was how perfectly cast Robert Hardy was as Mr. Brooke. I was not keen on Mr. Brooke in the novel. He was pretty annoying and drove me crazy, even more than Rosamund Vincy did, and she was my least favorite character. But even though he's kind of an idiot, I think that's what I called him in my review of the book, he's not ill-intentioned or bad-humored, he's just, I don't know, scatterbrained and out of touch. Robert Hardy did a fine job playing this up, and even added something to the character that made him more comical than irritating, and even sympathetic. So I ended up liking him a lot more than I expected to. Like I said at the start of this video though, Casaubon left the deepest impression on me. Patrick Malahide does a great job bringing out all the subtle complexities of Casaubon that made him such a great character in the book. I didn't love Casaubon, but I couldn't hate him either. Most of the inhabitants of Middlemarch who know Casaubon do hate him, and they're pretty merciless in their unappealing descriptions of him. But the more I learned about what made him tick, his insecurity, his paranoia, his crippling doubts, the more I found it impossible to detest him. I suspect that was Eliot's intention. At certain moments, I felt pity for the antagonists, while the protagonists, the good guys, often made such foolish or naive decisions that it made me cringe. That lack of idealized individuals gives the story a greater touch of realism, I think. Some characters I even liked more on screen than I did in the book, as if the behavior I found annoying on the page, when distilled or condensed for the visual medium, became more palatable. The big exception to that statement is Mr. Raffles, who was even more repulsive on screen than he was in the book. Ugh. Eliot's novel was adapted by classic British literature screen adapter extraordinaire Andrew Davies, whose work you are probably familiar with if you're a fan of these BBC miniseries. He wrote a lot of the big ones, including some of my favorites. His adaptations often take a few liberties here and there, adding spicy or romantic moments that weren't actually printed in the original text, but that tend to become fan favorites. But other than that, they tend to follow their source material very closely. And in most respects, this adaptation is super faithful. However, there were some omissions that surprised me. Let's see if I can talk about this without going into spoilers. There is a horrible secret that comes out about a certain character, something that he did in his past, and it causes all of society to ostracize him. But they never tell us what exactly he did. There are some shaky allusions, but they never give us the full details of what it is that he's guilty of. My mom noticed that these explanatory details were missing, but since she hasn't read the book, she did not know that that backstory also reveals something about another character, which helps bring certain threads of the story together. There are a lot of things going on in this book, and this ties some of it together in a satisfying way, and also brings in another level of Eliot's social criticism, the issue of anti-Semitism in Victorian England, which is something she touched on in other works. Since the miniseries is so faithful up to this point, the absence of this kind of significant element was all the more noticeable, especially to me. It was like they decided not to connect all the dots for some reason, which left the picture slightly incomplete. I also couldn't help noticing that most of the relatively few scenes from the book that were left out were Will Ladislaw scenes. Rufus Sewell gets plenty of screen time, I'm not complaining, but it would have been nice if he'd had some more dialogue. I missed a couple of those scenes, which helped give more insight into his character. I think I'm going to stop there. That's about all I have to say about Middlemarch without going into more specific detail, and I really don't want to go down that road, though I do have more thoughts on certain characters and plot lines. I am curious to know what you think of this one if you've seen it, whether you've seen it and read the book and you have thoughts in comparison of the two, or if you've just seen the adaptation because you love to watch period dramas and you don't necessarily have the time to read a long book. That's totally fine. I am curious to know, though, what you thought of it, so go ahead and share your thoughts down below, and I will see you in a couple days. Thanks for watching. Bye!